the Paul is dead theory. So it's been one of those things where I've always just sort of brushed it off as an interesting theory. I've never fully bought the idea that Paul is actually dead and was fully replaced. Although I'm open-minded to hearing the clues, just because, if anything, they're really interesting that there are so many of them. And to me, I think if the Beatles were really in on it, then, man, did they have some really clever things going on. There really are tons of clues within the album artwork and the song lyrics, just hidden all over the place in the movies. And if you start to notice them, it's kind of hard not to. Alright, let's go over just the backstory of the Paul is dead theory real quick. So the basic premise is that Paul McCartney died in a car crash in 1966 and was subsequently replaced by a look-alike that could take his place and sing all of his songs, looked just like him through constructive surgery, and he just took over. Apparently so that the fans wouldn't be upset, but that's the actual reasons as to why are a little iffy. A lot of people suspect that his name was Billy Shears or William Shears, which is the name given in the title track to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, when they introduce Billy Shears right before with a little help from my friends, and they say that itself is a clue because Paul sings that line and then switches over to Ringo singing with a little help from my friends, which sort of signifies that someone else is taking Paul's place. Yeah, the rumor actually spread and caught on quite a bit in the 60s. There were magazine articles and lots of things being said about it even back then. So the fact that it still pursues to this day is really intriguing. There was even a cover of Life magazine that said Paul is still with us, just to sort of let the public know that he hadn't died. There's a lot of album artwork we can get into about the clues, but if we take a look at Abbey Road, you'll see that the four Beatles are all dressed completely different. Some say that they're on their way to Paul's funeral, and Paul isn't wearing shoes, which signifies that he's not living. And the license plate on the Volkswagen Bug says 28 if, which is the age that he would have been if he was still alive at the time. Another book I haven't read, but I've heard a lot about, is The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which is supposedly Paul McCartney writing this book either himself or through a ghostwriter that's taking on, Paul McCartney's giving him what to write, and he's writing it for him, by the name of Thomas E.U. Harriot. And fun fact, I was actually at a used bookstore a week or two ago, and I saw a copy of this there, and I was so excited I was going to buy it, but it was going for $50, so I didn't pick it up that day, but I took a look inside and read a couple pages, and I'm not too sad I didn't pick it up. I've even found some channels on YouTube that are dedicated to this topic alone, such as this one here. This is the most popular video on the channel, and let's see what it says here.
My heart was still in India, I mean, that was the big thing for me when it happened in the 66. It was after that, everything else seemed like hard work, it was a job. It was like doing something I didn't really want to do. I was losing interest in being fab at that point. That was the big thing for me when it happened in the 66.
So the main takeaway from this video is George is saying the big thing that happened in 1966, right? And it's supposed to be a subtle clue to the car crash. But let's look at what happened to the Beatles in 1966. So I found an interview with George Martin where they ask him, What about the turning point in 1966? And George Martin said, the pressure was coming from all sources. There were death threats. They were manhandled in the Philippines by an unruly crowd. They were virtually booed out of the Philippines because they didn't turn up at a reception for the president's wife. But nobody else knew that George Harrison was in fear of his life because he actually had some poison pen letters saying, "You'll die in the next 5 days." And the assassination of Kennedy wasn't so far away. It was pretty hair-raising stuff. That, together with the mass adulation wherever they went, they couldn't escape. That made them want to retreat, and of course, they didn't have any lives of their own either. It's all very well to have this great deal of fame, but when you can't escape it, and you're always with 3 other guys, you want to say, hey, wait a minute, where's the girlfriend? Where's my children? What kind of family life is this? It doesn't exist. And so that was from an interview around 1970. And wow, that says a lot to me about where George Harrison was during that time. If he was getting death threats, and if you remember what happened in the Philippines, where it was a pretty crazy incident where they really upset the president's wife. So really we can see that 1966 was just about the time that George was getting tired of it all, and not only that, he was getting death threats, and he wanted to settle down with Patty Boyd, and he wanted to have a life outside of just traveling and being with his bandmates all the time. So makes sense that he'd be referring to that when he talks about the thing that happened in 1966. Again, there were since the 60s there have been a ton of articles about the hoax because it's been around that long, so it's not uncommon to actually see articles about it. And here we have the famous Red and Blue albums, kind of comparing the way they look. But, I mean, if you look at John, he looks different. If you look at George and Ringo, they look different. To me, Paul's eyes look really similar. His nose looks really similar. And they're just getting older. I mean, I know personally my looks changed a lot from my early 20s to my late 20s. Okay, the Paul McCartney catalog, and I think they're pointing out that it's from 1967 through 2019. But, I mean, ever since yesterday, Paul has been writing his own songs on his own time that didn't end up being Beatles songs, so perhaps they're referring to the songs that he wrote while he was still in the Beatles, but I'm not sure about that one. So I can definitely see some differences there, but again, I don't think that it's a different person. It's just a younger person and an older version of the same person with different expression on his face, different haircut, facial hair. To me, it looks like the same person still. He's got different hair and facial hair, and his eyebrows are different, but it looks the same. Again, here we're looking at a much older version of Paul. I'm going to guess he's at least in his 30s there, maybe even older. Paul's starting to get some wrinkles coming through. He's pushing his hair back, but it's still the same guy.
This joke, to be yourselves, because that was the purpose of going there, to try and find who yourself really is.
So that one's kind of taken out of context, and I think he's probably referring to India and the sort of spiritual quest that they were on. Not so much that they're trying to drop clues that the real Paul is not among them.
You see, a big change happened in 1966. We were all quite happy in our little ruts right up until, I think, 1966, when this experience happened.
So when did George Harrison sort of break through as an identity on
1966. Thing for me when it happened in the 66.
Again, in 1966, George married Patty Boyd. He was getting death threats. He was tired of touring. He just wanted to settle down, and that's really all he's talking about.
It was after that, everything else seemed like hard work. It was a job. It was like doing something I didn't really want to do. I was losing interest in being fab.
A little later on, I joined the best band in the world.
And he did, because John started the band as a skiffle band called the Quarrymen. and Paul wasn't in it originally, so he's right in saying he joined it later. This is actually one of my own videos here from a while ago, where I have the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band bass drum pulled up, and it's going to show you one thing that is fascinating, no matter what you think about it.
Center stage on this iconic album cover, a mirror placed across the middle of Lonely Hearts unveils a hidden reflection. It reveals the numbers 1, 1, 1, X, then the word he, followed by an arrow pointing up at Paul, while simultaneously pointing down to the flowers over Paul's grave. Then, finally, the ominous word die.
So if you do look, it has the I1, IX, he, arrow, die, and that does equal out to what would be September 11th, or it would be November 9th. And then it does point up to Paul and down to what they say is the grave, and then it says die. So if that's just a coincidence, then that's pretty nuts. So I'm not saying that this is any hard evidence that Paul is dead theory is real. I just think this is one of the most fascinating ones I've seen, and it's worth looking at, because if the Beatles created that, then that just shows how brilliant they really are, that they would go to those lengths, you know. And so I'm just going to play a couple of clips from Wings of Pegasus. Go check the whole video out. It's really good. But he's sort of doing a rebuttal to the Paul is dead, and giving some evidence there.
And as I scroll from one to the next, you can see that the only difference here is the angle at which the picture's been taken. This is the same picture placed over the top, going between.
So he's taking the picture on the right and superimpose it to the picture on the left, and he's saying that if you change the transparency, they'll blend into each other. And he also says that the distance between the eyes, that's something that's really hard to do, if not done through birth, if you know what I mean. Like, not something you could really do with plastic surgery.
Between the two, and look at his eyes. His eyes stay in exactly the same place. They are the same eyes. They never move. Just the eyes matching up, you know, from two different people would be, you know, a bit weird, a bit of a freakish thing.
And here he goes on to show that Paul was actually taller than John, because a lot of people said there was a height difference between the real Paul and the Billy Shears imposter.
It shows that he is taller than John Lennon. That's a 4-inch difference between him and 6'3". So you've still got the same height difference at the beginning of the 1960s as at the end. It's just what height you think John Lennon was, but he's always been taller. Changed. And these are teeth. These are so unique that they use these. Yeah, if they identify a body, sometimes they have to go to the dental records.
So those are just a couple of things that I think were interesting from that video. Like I said, go check out the rest of it. There's a lot more that he covers in that video. So at the end of the day, for the record, I don't think Paul was replaced. I think he's still alive. I think we have the real Paul with us, and I wouldn't want to insult the legend of someone who's made so many incredible songs and touched so many lives. However, I do think there's a possibility that maybe the Beatles ran with the hoax as a joke, a publicity stunt. Maybe Paul was in on making some clues, and, you know, if that's the case, then he kind of deserves to be scrutinized a little bit. It's just really hard to say. But what do you think? Let me know. What's your favorite piece of evidence? Do you think it's all hogwash? Do you think he's actually been replaced? Is it the Illuminati? Is there something behind it? I'd really love to hear what you think. So, alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.